that night, the day she was back? I mean,
I left work early that morning, like 5:15, 5:30. So like she barely gotten into bed pretty much. She barely gotten into bed early that morning, like 5:15, 5:30. So like she barely gotten into bed like 5:15, 5:30. So like she barely gotten into bed pretty much. 15, 5:30. So like she barely gotten into bed pretty much. 30. So like she barely gotten into bed pretty much. 30. So like she barely gotten into bed pretty much. She barely gotten into bed pretty much. Barely gotten into bed pretty much.
And then did you see her before you went to work? Did you say anything to her?
When she went back, like when she told me she was going to go to her friend's house and be with the kids, take the kids over there.
Oh, she told you she was taking the kids to
Yeah.
her friend's house?
Yeah.
She didn't say who, though?
Oh, no, but she was still in bed when that happened.
And this was after the conversation?
Yeah, it was between like 4 to 5 a.m.
Did you say anything to her?
When she went back, like when she told me she was going to go to her friend's house and be with the kids, take the kids over there.
Oh, she told you she was taking the kids to
Yeah.
her friend's house?
Yeah.
She didn't say who, though?
Oh, no.
And then did you see her before you went to work? Did you say anything to her?
When she went back, like when she told me she was going to go to her friend's house and be with the kids, take the kids over there.
And then did you see her before you went to work? Did you say anything to her?
When she went back, like when she told me she was going to go to her friend's house and be with the kids, take the kids over there.
And then did you see her before you went to work? Did you say anything to her?
When she went back, like when she told me she was going to go to her friend's house and be with the kids, take the kids over there.
Oh, she told you she was taking the kids to
Yeah.
her friend's house?
Yeah.
She didn't say who, though?
Oh, no, but she was still in bed when that happened.
Did you see your wife when she got home?
She got home really late, about 2 a.m. from the airport when she got back from Arizona.
Did you wake up and say, you know?
No, I saw her when she got in, but it was really quick, just because it was 2 a.m. in the morning. But I saw the kids in the monitor before I left, and that was it. But it was really quick, just because it was 2 a.m. in the morning. But I saw the kids in the monitor before I left, and that was it. But it was really quick, just because it was 2 a.m. in the morning. But it was really quick. But it was really quick. But it was really quick. But it was really quick, just because it was 2 a.m. in the morning. But I saw the kids in the monitor before I left, and that was it.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. This is episode 3 in our ongoing deep dive into the crime scene evidence. In this episode, we're going to be looking at the route that Shanann took when she entered the Watts residence, 2825 Saratoga Trail. The route she took at 0148 when she arrived, when she sort of walked to the front door, closed the door, what happened on the other side of the door, where she went when she entered the lounge. What I'm going to do in this episode that's going to be a little bit different to the other episodes is I'm going to take you kind of on a journey with the true crime rocket science methodology, just to show you how the thinking evolved in this particular area. And I'm going to show you exactly the process, how it went step by step, based on what we knew and reconciling all of that. You are probably going to need to listen to this video a couple of times. You're certainly going to probably want to listen to those audio clips right in the beginning to hear what Chris is actually saying and what is reinforced through each of those 3 clips separately, and each of those clips when combined, what is the singular message that's reinforced. Because bear in mind, that was what I started with. So when I wrote the first book, which came out as early as September 2018, really all that we had was the warrantless arrest affidavit and these sermons on the porch. And my argument was that it was more than enough information already to know basically what happened. So we are going to start with the Ring doorbell footage, even though at the time that I wrote the first, second, third book of the 9-part series, we still hadn't seen the Ring doorbell footage. In fact, the Ring doorbell footage didn't even come out when the Discovery came out. I think it came out in February of 2019. So it actually came out after the second confession, after the second interview in Dodge Correctional. And if you really think about it, there was a huge furore about that, and then prior to that confession coming out, this Ring doorbell footage came out, which kind of distracted people. They sort of were, this sort of almost eclipsed, the Ring doorbell footage almost eclipsed the second confession. And one wonders, well, was that the idea? It is just very interesting that it was held back for as long as it was. And it's something that we, 2 years later, forget, that it wasn't released with the original Discovery. Now, the reason it wasn't released may have to do with the prosecution and the district attorney holding their cards close to their chest just in case Chris Watts changed his mind and did want to lodge an appeal. Then this was some evidence that they could field at trial just to allege certain things. So a couple of obvious observations which may be not that obvious to people are, for example, the footage starts off with Nickole Atkinson's vehicle backing away and Shanann walking to the door. Now, you might think nothing of that, and you might think, well, so what? That is what's going on. But one thing you are not seeing is you're not seeing the car coming down Steeple Rock Drive. That is the road that sort of comes perpendicularly down into Saratoga Trail. That's also the road Watts took when he left for the well site the next morning, and I'll obviously deal with that in a separate deep dive. Now, just a couple of other things just to mention about that is, so we don't actually see Nickole Atkinson's vehicle coming down Steeple Rock Drive, but neither do we see Chris Watts' truck. When he arrives back from the well site, he doesn't come down Steeple Rock Drive, and Steeple Rock Drive is the obvious approach. It's the shortest way. People who visited the site know this. People who visited the address know this. And we also know that Chris Watts didn't come the shortest route. We know he went to dispose of some evidence on the way. But it is interesting that even Nickole Atkinson's vehicle, or when the Ring doorbell footage activates, it's after Shanann has removed her suitcase from the vehicle, and it is as she's sort of already walking towards the door. And there's an obvious reason for this. The range of the Ring doorbell sensor is, which is sort of motion activated, is limited. So it's not going to pick up movement when it is necessarily out in the road. It's going to pick up movement when it's on the porch area and maybe just a little bit further than that. And this opens up kind of an interesting segue, I guess, into what we're going to talk about a little bit in terms of the deep dive into the crime scene, in terms of the Trinastich video and the driveway and all that, and you know that some of the most viewed videos are debates around what is actually happening on the driveway, what is happening, what is causing these mysterious shadows, what is actually happening in that small little fragment through the trees and over the Trinastich vehicles. What are we actually seeing? Now, there's a kind of a clue in the fact that this Ring doorbell footage activates not at the moment that the car is actually visible from the perspective of the front door coming down the road. It's actually activated once Shanann is within the range that I'm referring to. So what I'm trying to say is, what you're seeing through the Ring doorbell footage isn't the same as the same sight as a human being has, or even an animal has. In other words, continuous vision. it is motion activated, but it's dependent on it being in a certain range. And so if it's not in that range, it simply doesn't see it. Does that make sense? So it's, if you watch it a couple of times, you see that Nickole Atkinson's vehicle is reversing. She doesn't seem to drive all the way up to the garage door, possibly because she doesn't want to wake the children. And another reason why Shanann probably doesn't lower the suitcase and put it on wheels is because she doesn't want that rattle of the suitcase over the the substrate of the driveway, that sound, that kind of rumbling, to wake up the children. Bear in mind, their windows, the bedroom windows of the children, are directly above the garage. Those two windows are directly above the garage. And that's another reason why Shanann didn't want Watts' car parked on the driveway, because when he left, that would wake the children up. That's also a clear indication when he reversed his truck. One of the reasons why he did what he would not normally do is because the children were dead, and there was no reason to be concerned about waking them up. Now, there's a sizable amount of people who will tell you that no, Chris Watts said the children were alive. Chris Watts, this is in his second confession. In his first, he acknowledged that the children were actually killed first. So that's something quite important to bear in mind. In the very first time he spoke about it, his very first version was that the children were dead first, and then he killed Shanann. So that's his own version. Anyway, he then corrected that to say, no, he killed the children last. He took them to the well site, and even though Shanann was dead in the truck, and the children were sort of with him, and that was fine. A lot of people have actually believed that. But there's, besides what he said, there's a lot of evidence and in terms of time that is going to give you an important clue as to what really happened. And one of the original sort of clues that I went with right from the beginning was, okay, so this is a silent crime. There was no screaming, no neighbors heard any noises. There were no shots, there were no screams, there were no bangs or anything like that. In fact, the neighbors didn't hear anything. The only neighbor who saw anything was Betty Marcoux, who I think was on her way to gym. And she went to gym every morning. I think she said Chris Watts was up a little bit earlier than usual. And, she saw his truck on. She didn't really remark about it being unusual, backed up on the driveway, but Trinastich said it was unusual, and other people said it was unusual as well. Interestingly, the car being backed onto a driveway comes up in two other cases as well. One of them is Casey Anthony, and another one is Scott Peterson, where you have this sort of backing up to the driveway, and then there's a situation where somebody disappears permanently. In Casey Anthony's case, it wasn't just backed onto the driveway, it was literally in the garage. So to review the rocket science journey, so obviously, as I say, I didn't have the benefit of the Ring doorbell camera. Nobody did until February, which is really late in the game. So how I try to kind of get a sense of the inside of the house was, first and foremost, from a 30-minute spiel Shanann did on a Saturday morning. I think it was could have been in May, where she, for half an hour, she was sitting in her lounge, and she would sort of pan the video to her husband, who was sitting on the floor playing with the girls, and every now and then Cece would run up to her, and that video kind of gave you a very sort of long view, a sort of a slow view of the inside, including sort of proportions of what it was like inside the lounge area, looking at the front door, looking at the stairway, and just getting a sense, just being able to orientate yourself a little bit. And then at one point Shanann got up off the couch and she went through the lounge, and she went into the kitchen and out the kitchen door and sort of sat on the steps and continued with her spiel. And anyway, I kind of studied that in quite a lot of detail, besides what she was saying, looking at her surroundings, looking at what the lounge looked like. And of course, I looked through the Facebook as well, just to get other images of the house. And because it's such a big house with so many nooks and crannies, it was actually quite difficult to do that. It's quite difficult to figure out where was what, and a lingering mystery that really stayed kind of an unknown for a really long time was the basement. I got blueprints of a similar house, but the one aspect that remained really mysterious for a really long time, even after the body came out, was the basement. And that proved to be critical information, and we'll get to that in a second. Well, we'll get to that in the episode dealing with the basement. So, one thing that you sort of did see every now and then was Watts literally working out on the carpet, doing push-ups, doing sort of squats or something like that. But he was basically sort of getting very familiar with the ground, right? He was sort of crawling over it. He was working out on it, and getting to know it really well. Anyway, those images also gave one an idea of what it looked like, what it felt like, what was going on. Then some of the earlier images that I kind of examined was from sort of stock images of a similar house. You had basically the same framework of lounge, stairs, and so on, but the furniture would have been slightly different. But basically, the infrastructure of the house was the same. And in some of these demo models of the house, there was like a wooden area in front of the door where where you could take off your shoes, and that's exactly what Shanann did. We do know now that she removed her favorite shoes, and she tended to leave them at the door. And some people said, if she left her shoes at the door, why wouldn't she leave her suitcase at the bottom of the stairs? I don't think it's the same thing. I just don't think it's the same thing, but that is how some people reasoned. Anyway, using these standard images, it gave one a really good sense of line of sight, how people could see inside the house, what it felt like on the other side of the door. We're going to deal with that, but now we come to the point where we got hold of the discovery, and having written at this point around about 4 books by the time the discovery came out, the 4th book was written in a time that sort of coincided with the discovery, Rape of Cassandra. So that was sort of bridging that time. But I spent a lot of time looking through the front door while Coonrod was. So basically through that little window, trying to see how much can you actually see when you look through there. Because no one would be more acutely aware of something like that than the murderer. Now, what is really interesting with the Watts house is almost all the windows are closed, either with blinds or with curtains. And the only exceptions are the 2 long vertical windows by the door, and then 2 windows at the top, on the top floor that sort of open into the lounge, right? They don't have blinds on them, but there's sort of nothing behind them either except empty space. However, if you're in the house opposite the Watts house, and you can see through those windows which don't have blinds on them, you could theoretically see into the loft area. And this was important to establish, to exclude the loft area as a possible murder area. In the previous YouTube video, the title image had a thumbnail on it, and someone correctly spotted that the shirt Shanann is wearing in that thumbnail is the shirt that she was actually buried in. It's a kind of shirt that sort of fades from kind of a light grey or white to purple, and then there's a sort of a silver heart on it. And you can clearly see that's the shirt she was wearing in that selfie. It's not the shirt she was wearing when she arrived home. Now, we should pay a little bit of attention to how she's dressed when she arrives home. She's wearing sandals, she's wearing jeans. Someone actually said that they're actually leggings that made you look like jeans, and a grey shirt with the word love written on it in pink, and then also kind of a black jersey. I'm not sure what you guys call it, a sweater, I guess. Is it a sweater or a jumper or a pullover? But anyway, we call it a jersey. It's just kind of a light black jersey. That is not the same as the sweater found on the bed. It's not the same one. It doesn't look like it's got a hoodie, and it looks fairly light material. Also, just bear in mind that Shanann arrives with both her arms kind of tied down in one way or the other. So in the one hand she's carrying a suitcase, in the other a handbag which would later find its way to the kitchen counter, and also her phone. And she pauses at the door to enter a code, and her phone is on at that point, and she probably deactivates the alarm as she enters as well, and we're going to address that in a moment. And that brings us to beneath the stairs. We're now on the other side of the door, and we're beneath the stairs, and an initial thought I had was that Shanann closed the door and then walked to the stairs with her suitcase on the wheels. And the moment the suitcase went from that area where there's sort of a hard surface to the carpet, Watts would have heard that, and he would have known exactly where she was. And so he didn't really need to see her for that to, for him to know exactly where she was. It is very useful to see the inside of the house from both the outside looking in and the inside looking towards the door. When we follow Nickole into the crime scene, she's following Chris Watts, and Officer Coonrod, Scott Coonrod, is following her. They walk by the stairs, and Nickole actually looks at the suitcase. Unfortunately, Nickole Atkinson sort of passes in front of the camera, so that critical period where Chris Watts walks down the sort of passage, we can't quite see where he's looking. It's sort of cut off to some extent. In any event, he leads them into the kitchen, away from the stairs, away from the basement. And then when they're in the kitchen, he then heads back the same way, quickly goes down into the basement, and then lets Dita out. He doesn't lead them to the suitcase and say, well, this is a suitcase or something, although Nickole does linger there. So now we move on to the lounge and the Vivint sort of layer. And what I want to sort of emphasize here is my thinking started off that I thought the attack happened kind of right at the bottom of the stairs. So it was almost the moment Shanann took one or two steps onto the stairs, Chris Watts rushed her, or whatever you want to put it, that it was a kind of like a stealth attack from behind, and that the wrestle, essentially, the sort of life and death sort of contest that was on, essentially happened on that small little first stairway before the landing. And what I also found quite interesting was, I didn't know this from the arrest affidavit, you only saw it from the tiny glimpses you got if you were paying attention, was that the suitcase wasn't just at the foot of the stairs, it had actually been moved 2 or 3 feet inward, and then there was also a gap between the suitcase and I think there was some jeans that Chris Watts said were too big for him. In any event, you would have had the possibility, if you had a proper investigation, that on those jeans of his may have been fibers and possibly DNA, and also on the suitcase. And then he could have said, well, yes, because it was like they were, right beside one another, right? In a situation where someone is murdered inside the home by someone who lives there, it is kind of ridiculous to make the whole DNA case simply because you would expect someone's DNA to be there. And so it's more where there's an absence of evidence that you would make the case that there's something going on. And interestingly, in the Amanda Knox case, and by the way, I am doing a thing on Twitter, hashtag 13 years ago today MK for Meredith Kircher. That's 13, the number 13. Around about this time, 13 years ago, things really went south with Amanda Knox and her housemates. They basically decided they didn't like her, and she kind of returned the compliment by saying, well, I just want to hang out with Italians. I don't really want to hang out with you guys. And then about 2 weeks later, Meredith Kircher was murdered. So this event is quite important. But coming back to the Watts case, via the Amanda Knox case, what was very interesting when the police went there was they couldn't find virtually any fingerprints, as far as I can remember, of Amanda Knox, even though she lived there. Why not? I mean, she lived there, you would expect to find fingerprints, right? That's what we're talking about. So in the Watts case, if it had gone to court and there was a DNA thing, that wouldn't necessarily mean anything because you'd expect them to be, Shanann's DNA would be in the house and Chris Watts' DNA would be in the house. What would be groundbreaking was if you found DNA belonging to, say, Nickole Atkinson. And bear in mind, she'd also been in the house on I think the 4th and was it the 12th or the 14th? But she was there on 2 occasions, and it's possible that her DNA could have been then also transferred when Watts visited Kissinger and then returned. Bear in mind, he had sex with Kissinger on the 11th of August. So, there was a lot of potential chances for transfer. But it turned out that wasn't necessary. In the beginning, I spent a lot of time looking or trying to find small little images and glimpses of the carpet beneath the stairs. Because I thought, even if Shanann was murdered on the first or second step, likely she would have been dragged down there, and that may have been a point of, I don't know, just was expecting some kind of ruffling under the stairs there. And the other reason why I thought the stairs was a good area for a soundless crime is it is the most soundless space in the Watts home, with the possible exception of the basement. But if you think of the staircase in the Watts home, it's the central area and it's kind of surrounded by walls on a couple of sides. And it also has the railing that's preventing Shanann from escaping to the right. There's a wall preventing escape from to the left, and at the top is of course the barrier, the child barrier, preventing escape to the end. And of course, if Watts was below and attacking her, she wouldn't want to go down. And Watts, being the lighter, faster, fitter of the two, would easily be able to catch her and trap her. It is interesting looking at the footage, looking at Baumhover and Chris Watts standing beneath the stairs and looking at the ground, and one wonders what was really going on in Chris Watts' mind. Was he thinking about when he put the suitcase there? Again, it's just frustrating that you never see a clear shot of it. In terms of the Vivint, some people have argued that there couldn't have been, the crime couldn't have been executed after Shanann arrived home, because the Vivint says nothing. The Vivint is kind of, there's nothing there for like 2 hours. And so because the Vivint says nothing, it means that there couldn't have been a crime. I find that a kind of almost like a childish, naivete to say, oh, because a sensor doesn't tell you anything, it means nothing happened. It's the same kind of naivete where you look at Chris Watts' phone and you say, oh, there are no messages here, I guess he's innocent. Don't be naive. The absence of evidence is evidence. And so the fact that you've got this nothingness happening suggests something was happening. Didn't Shanann just go downstairs to quickly fetch something? Didn't, whatever, something out the fridge or whatever. So there's no activity, and I think there was a heck of a lot of activity, and the 11 staircases Chris Watts climbed on that morning shows that was what was really happening. That seems a little bit of an oversight from him, that he forgot to take, not sure if it was by his watch or his phone, but it did measure him going up 11 flights of stairs that morning. So there certainly was activity. And the staircase was definitely part of the crime scene in some way. Something else we know about Vivint from the phone data review is that Chris Watts and Shanann argued a lot about Vivint in the days leading up to him going to North Carolina. She was mostly arguing about that sensor in the garage that didn't work, and ultimately that played a role in the crime. But we know that Chris Watts had lengthy conversations with Vivint and probably found out how to adjust the settings and sensitivities of Vivint. Sometimes you can adjust them that they don't pick up things at a certain height, and things like an animal, like Dieter, if Dieter was running around. And of course they did leave Dieter in the house when they went to North Carolina. The thing that I'm not 100% sure about, I would be more sure if I owned this particular alarm system. Can it be deactivated by phone? I'm sure it can be by an app, and Chris Watts and Shanann had that app. Would there be a log of that deactivation? I'm not sure about that. And is it possible to wipe out router logs, log entries, things like that? I guess it is. If Chris Watts was able to do that with the secret calculator app, I don't see why he couldn't do that with the router. Whether he's that technically savvy, I don't know. Maybe that is where he spent all his attention and forgot about the bed sheet, the fitted sheet. It's difficult to say. The other thing is that is possible is that he turned the power off, which would have turned everything off, the router and everything else. And then could he have ascended from the basement, or did he turn the Vivint off at the Vivint sensor, which is sort of right next to the staircase? It's right, it's sort of as you come out the basement and around the corner, it's right there. Could he have turned it off there or deactivated it there? And that's certainly possible. I don't know, because I don't have the system, whether Shanann would have activated the ground floor when she went up to sleep, or whether she would have deactivated it when she entered and then activated it as she went up the stairs. I don't know. But it is possible that Watts could have done that himself as well, deactivated it and then kind of committed the crime. And it would have been sort of silent. It wouldn't have the deactivation. Shanann wouldn't necessarily have known about it. One thing to sort of address is, do you get notifications based on the Vivint sensor? And we know that when someone appeared at the door, Watts was alerted by the sensors. And, can you also delete them and cover your tracks in that way? Well, anything digital you can get rid of, that kind of thing. Things like browser history, you can get rid of it. So in the same way that the sensor detecting Shanann arriving only sort of triggered as she stepped into its range, you have the same limits with the Vivint sensor, that It's actually very easy to neutralize a security sensor like that. It can be as simple as putting a piece of paper over it, that it just doesn't detect movement. So it's not someone saying that the crime couldn't have happened because the sensor saw nothing. That's nonsense. So now let's move on to the next section on Shanann's route inside, dealing with the stairs and also a false alarm. In fact, more than one false alarm. Let's start with the suitcase. So in the very first narrative I wrote, which was published in September 2018, I described Shanann lugging a sort of neon pink orange suitcase behind her when she arrived home. Now, bear in mind, I hadn't seen the Ring doorbell footage, no one had, and there was no description of the suitcase. There was no discovery, nothing. So I obviously went into Shanann's social media to try and find details like what color car did Nickole Atkinson drive, what kind of car did she drive, what kind of suitcase did Shanann use, and that was how I sketched the beginning of the man underneath Christopher Watts. Of course, it later turned out that it wasn't a neon pink orange bag, it was a black bag, and of course Shanann didn't have the bag on rollers. She was carrying the bag, and obviously we know Shanann better now. We know that she was very afraid of waking up her children, because that would involve quite a lot of drama and difficulty, putting them back to sleep again. So another false alarm, and this is in a weird way quite funny. I thought that I noticed on the railing a small little perforation or a small little break in the lattice of the wrought iron railing, and I wrote a blog post on Crime Rocket about it. I didn't only see it once, I probably saw it 3 or 4 times, but it's one of those things when you're seeing video and you're taking screen grabs of video, it's not the same as a high quality photo, and so when you're looking for something, you tend to find it. When you're looking for that little break in the lattice, you find it. And then it later turned out there wasn't a break in the lattice at all. I don't know what I was trying to prove. I suppose I thought it was possible that when Shanann was flailing, she may have struck out with her hand, and that her ring did that, or she kicked out with her shoe and just broke that little piece of metal off or something like that. But it does raise an interesting point, which is if Shanann was attacked on the stairs, why didn't she suffer bruising in terms of the edge of the stairs? I think the answer is, firstly, the way that she was attacked, she was facing the ground, so she wasn't able to move very much. Second of all, what was under her was a carpet, which is soft. And thirdly, I think she was not necessarily all on the stairs. A part of her body may have been on the landing. In fact, they may have slid down slightly, but I think that the landing is possibly one answer why there wasn't injury. And this brings us to the final section, which is dealing with the child's gait. And bear in mind that if the children were upstairs in bed as they were supposed to be, as Shanann would have expected, then that gate would have been closed. And bear in mind, if the gate was open, it would indicate to Shanann that Chris Watts had been derelict in his duty, and she'd probably be immediately upset. She would expect that gate to be closed, for the children's safety. And I think that gate was closed, which meant if Shanann was going to rise up that staircase with a bag in one hand, a handbag in another, and her phone, she was completely at the mercy of someone going for a throat from behind. She wouldn't be able to extricate herself very quickly or very easily from the bags that she was holding. Does that make sense? Before we go further, I just want to show an image of the life-size doll. There you can see it on the right-hand side. That doll was wrapped in a twister mat and placed on that couch that's right in front of her with I think there was one orange cushion at her head and another one at her feet. And I didn't think this in the beginning, but I do think that Chris Watts sent this to kind of put something on her phone. I just don't think he expected her to share it on social media, because the timing of it is quite significant on the 9th. It is possible that he intended to do something that night on the 9th, I think. And I believe he is the one who did that. I don't think it's something that Bella did, and I don't think he was in a gaming mood to send something like that. Then I just want to also highlight some people just keep saying over and over again, how did they know that Shanann's car was in the garage if they couldn't get access to the house? How did they know the car seats were in the car? Well, because there are windows in the garage, and Nickole Atkinson looked through those windows. That's how they were able to see that Shanann's car was home, and it was strange that she wasn't answering her phone. Now, I just want to deal with my theory that Shanann was attacked sort of, initially I thought she was attacked right on the bottom of the stairs, and that Chris Watts was sort of hiding in like a pillar, sort of in the middle there, and that he could see he could be hiding behind that in the semi-darkness, and he could see on his phone Shanann approaching the door, and he would know as she went up the stairs that he just needed to sort of come around the corner, take a few steps, and sort of attack her. I don't know whether that's how can I put it? I don't know whether that is less likely than him coming from the lounge area, where he could have sort of waited and to some extent watched TV, waiting for it to come home, and then come round when just as she sort of reached the door. He could have deactivated the Vivint the moment she stepped inside, and then as she went up the stairs. The only problem is with this version, all Shanann had to do was look to her right from the stairs, and it would be quite easy to see him. That's the problem. Bear in mind, when Watts attacked her, Shanann didn't cry out. So it does make sense that the attack happened on that area of stairs before the landing, because it's the only place he could sort of attack her from behind. As soon as she went higher up the stairs, it would be easier for her to look over her shoulder and see him. Does that make sense? In terms of the title image of this particular episode, which is the third and last in the deep dive series on YouTube, the next 3 episodes will be available only on Patreon. You can view them for $1, as well as a lot of other content. But before I get to that, just in terms of the title image, what you're seeing there is one of the officers examining the carpet. There's quite a lot of examining of the carpet, just shining a light on it, and they still weren't able to really find anything. But Officer Lyons said that she could smell bleach or cleaning chemicals. There was a strong scent of that when she arrived on Tuesday, after he'd been cleaning all of Monday night. And she also said she saw vacuum lines in the carpet, and then there's the vacuum cleaner, so it's still out. And so not only do we know that Chris Watts cleaned, people who didn't know sensed it, because there was such strong kind of evidence, not just the lines, the scent as well. And that's it. Just a quick heads up in terms of episodes 4, 5 and 6. Episode 4 is a deep dive dealing with a basement, which I think is the most fascinating and important of the crime scenes. I think quite a lot happened there, as you can see from all the arrows there. That's episode 4. Episode 5 deals with some of the exterior aspects, the truck, the Trinastich video and stuff dealing with that, the shadows and so on. And then the final episode deals with the well site, Survey 319, and there's some kind of quite important information we need to deal with there. For example, I believe, I don't think any blood was shed in 2825 Saratoga Trail, but blood was shed at the well site, not only in the tanks but also Shanann's grave, and we're going to deal with that in episode 6. So if you're interested in continuing this series, please join us on Patreon at Patreon/TCRS. I will be putting short previews up of maybe 5 or 10 minutes. So I will try and tease you to check out the full episode on Patreon. Otherwise, you can join now for $1 a month. As I said earlier, I am doing a series on Twitter, hashtag 13 years ago today MK, so go and check that out. It is quite interesting. Do a search on the hashtag 13 years ago today MK, or just go to my Twitter timeline and click on that hashtag, and you'll get all the posts dealing with the last days of Meredith Kercher's life. If you guys would like me to read the warrantless arrest affidavit, I can do that. And I can also do, in the same way that I did the Coonrod narrative, I can do the narrative for example, Officer James and Officer Lyons. So if you'd like me to do that, just let me know in the comments. Thank you for listening. If you haven't subscribed, please do. Like, share, leave a comment. If you do share, please use the hashtag TCRS. And I'll see you guys next time.